after investigators discovered forensic evidence conclusively linking the bullet that allegedly killed his wife to a gun that was registered to him. Now, the police theorize, of course, that Melissa Silvera was murdered in the couple's Stony Hill home and that she did not die in her sleep, as had been widely reported. George Davis gives us the latest on this case that has gripped national attention.
Nationwide News understands that as per protocol, the country's firearm licensing authority, FLA, keeps a bullet that is fired from the gun of each licensed firearm holder. The bullet contains unique marks which correspond to the firearm issued to each firearm holder. Those unique indentations on the bullet are referred to as bullet striation marks or simply a ballistic fingerprint. Nationwide News understands that Jolyan Silvera was arrested after his wife's funeral. This after he had initially led family and friends to believe their loved one had died in his sleep. He was taken into custody after an autopsy was performed on Melissa Silvera and the bullet retrieved from her body. All sources say the suspicions of investigators were initially aroused based on the awkward positioning of Melissa's body at the crime scene. It's understood the position of her body brought into question the explanation that she died peacefully in her sleep. It's also understood she was not shot in the vagina, as was initially widely circulated online. But nationwide sources say the bullet retrieved from Melissa's body had the same unique striation marks which 100% matched the bullet kept by the FLA, which corresponded with the licensed firearm it had issued to Jolyan Silvera. This piece of compelling evidence led investigators to conclude that Melissa Silvera was killed by a bullet fired from the licensed firearm issued to the man she had vowed to stand by, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do they part. That is how, despite investigators finding that his gun barrel appeared to have been tampered with, former Member of Parliament and influential PNP politician failed to escape being charged in connection with his wife's death. George Davis for Nationwide News.
And as you can imagine, that's been a significant development. Nationwide, of course, broke the story earlier today. Now, our news center can confirm that the Office of Director of Public Prosecutions has not yet indicated whether it will accept the guilty plea offered by the former Member of Parliament. And that's important because the judge and the prosecution must accept the plea. There must be some basis in law as to why they'll not continue with the murder charge on the indictment. And just to remind you that Mr. Silvera was initially charged with murder, manslaughter, and using a firearm to commit a felony. So what does it mean if the plea is accepted? Well, we checked, and manslaughter carries a minimum sentence of about 3 years and a maximum sentence of 20 years. So if the guilty plea were to be accepted, and we expect that that decision could come as soon as tomorrow, because the matter will be called up again in court tomorrow, the DPP's decision, if she accepts the guilty plea, then Mr. Silvera is looking at a minimum of 3 years and a maximum of 20 years. However, if the plea were rejected by the DPP or by the presiding judge, and to remind you who is presiding, the Chief Justice Bryan Sykes, then of course murder, as you know, in Jamaica now carries a mandatory minimum of 50 years. So it'd be 50 years to life that Mr. Silvera would face if the manslaughter guilty plea is rejected, a murder trial ensues, and then the jury, if the jury finds him guilty, it would be looking at 50 years to life. Yeah. So we're going to see what happens tomorrow when the matter is called up. You'll recall, of course, that the media still isn't allowed inside. So we have to be relying on what's reported out to us by the prosecution and the defense. Now, Mr. Silvera apparently raised the fact that he would plead guilty to the lesser charge of manslaughter when he appeared in the gun court this morning. And at the previous court sitting in January, Silvera's attorneys had applied for an independent examination of critical ballistic evidence, resulting in a delay in the proceedings. Now, as you heard from the report from George Davis, that ballistic evidence could relate to that single bullet that's kept by the FLA and the markings contained on that bullet and what it indicates as to where or what gun would have fired the bullets that were found inside Mrs. Silvera's body. Critically, though, what we're reporting is that the positioning of the body would have been what indicated first aroused suspicion that she did not die peacefully in her sleep. And you'd recall how that was widely circulated. You recall there were several senior members of the People's National Party who had expressed condolences. There were people who were saying, who had repeated what turns out now to be, as the investigators have said, a lie, that she died peacefully in her sleep. The positioning of her body raised suspicions. And very important, we are understanding that there is no truth to the widely circulated rumor that Miss Silvera had been shot in the vagina. We're told that's not true. That's what our sources are saying. Yeah. Of course, Silvera is being represented by King's Counsel Peter Champagny and Attorney at Law Patrice Riley. But I want to take you also, listeners, through the timeline of what took us to this morning when we got news that the former lawmaker would enter a plea of guilty to the lesser charge of manslaughter. So you'd recall that on November 10, 2023, Melissa Silvera was reported to have died in her sleep. That's the first time we heard that. It was shocking. A lot of people were expressing, just outpouring of grief. You recall that Mr. Silvera, upon going to his wife's funeral, he was a picture of grief, crying. December 16, 2023, that's when the upgrade came. It was upgraded to a murder probe. The police launched a murder probe into the death of Mrs. Silvera. And of course, we had heard, as I said, on November 10 that she died in her sleep. And we reported on December 16 that had been upgraded to murder. Deputy Commissioner of Police in charge of crime at the time, Fitz Bailey, confirmed that news to our news center that the probe was underway. And there was the report that original investigators were also under scrutiny as to how they conducted that initial preliminary investigation, the preliminary assessment. Come December 18, 2023 now, Jolyan's firearm was seized. And we reported that the licensed firearm, and if you're paying attention to what we reported today, this becomes important because the licensed firearm belonging to the former lawmaker was seized by the police, and that gun was seized as the police intensified the probe into the suspected murder of his wife. He was interrogated by the police at the JCS Major Investigation Division, MID, for several hours that Friday evening. This is December 18, 2023 now. And he was questioned well into the hours of the Saturday morning, the next day. And that gun had been seized for ballistics testing. Come December 20, 2023 now, he was still being questioned by detectives. And on December 21, 2023, the police came out and said that there was no corruption, that there was no evidence of corruption in the conduct of the policeman who was the first responder at the house, because at the time there was all kinds of information circulating as to what might have happened and what did people see and why wasn't there a clear indication that murder had been committed or something untoward. Well, we're telling you now that suspicions were first aroused because of the positioning of her body. Yeah? Here's what DCP Bailey said at the time.
We're looking at the entire scenario. We have not come to any conclusion. I think there might be some, what I consider to be inexperience, and as a result of that, some things are overlooked. I heard a lot of statements being made, but the truth is, so far, we haven't seen any evidence of corruption as is reported in social media. It's one of those challenging investigations, but I think the men and women have the capacity and the skills and the competence, and we will use all the resources that we have to ensure that there is some level of closure and justice is served in this case. It's a very brutal act. We are up to the task, and we had a review just about 2 days ago.
That's former Deputy Commissioner of Police in charge of crime, DCP Bailey. He said at the time that it was not unusual for only one member of the JCF to process a death scene.
I heard discussion about whether or not one person should go on the scene. But if you have two persons working at any station, you can't leave the station unmanned. The sergeant actually told the sergeant. And it's a sudden death that he went to investigate. It was not any hostile situation. It's not abnormal, really.
That's former Deputy Commissioner of Police, DCP Fitz Bailey. Now, on January 12, 2024, Melissa was laid to rest. That funeral happening at the St. Andrew Parish Church in Halfway Tree. Yeah, she was 42 years old, and there were a lot of tributes. And as I said, you would recall that her husband, Jolyan Silvera, was seated with the family. He was a picture of grief, really seeming torn up by the pictures that we saw. Cynthia Silvera did the remembrance on behalf of her son, Jolyan Silvera. Here's what she said.
She was a force of nature, a nation builder in her own right, whose ambitions were deeply rooted in a desire to create a brighter future for our family and country. As a wife and mother, Melissa was unparalleled. Her dedication knew no bounds, and she approached parenthood with an unwavering commitment. From the smallest milestones to significant life events, she stood by our sons, Adam, Aidan, Justin, and Axel, with a radiance of pride and joy.
Yeah, so that's Catherine Silvera, the mother of Jolyan Silvera. And at that time, during that tribute, Jolyan Silvera was seated in the front row of the church with the three boys he shared with Melissa. At one point, he was seen tears flowing freely. You'd recall, you've seen the pictures. He was holding the youngest child in his arms, and Mrs. Silvera was laid to rest in the cemetery there at St. Andrew Parish Church. We move now to January 19, 2024, when Jolyan was picked up by the police. And then that same day, he was charged with the murder of his wife, Melissa. DCP Bailey announced that charge.
As the police continue its investigation in the murder of Melissa Silvera on Friday, the 19th of January, 2024, after a question and answer session at the Major Investigation Division Office, about 12 midday, Jolyan Silvera, age 52 years old, land developer of 2A Diamond Court, Stony Hill, St. Andrew, was formally charged by the police, that is the Major Investigation Division, for the murder of his wife, Melissa Silvera. The investigation continues as we believe that there are other charges that will be laid against Mr. Silvera.
And of course, other charges were laid. Manslaughter, using a firearm to commit a felony. Mr. Silvera was denied bail at least twice. Yeah, at least twice. And so the trial is now set to get underway. And this morning in court, he indicated he is prepared to plead guilty to the lesser charge of manslaughter. Yeah, we're going to take a break. And after the break, we'll bring you the distinction. What's the distinction? Because people are asking, what's the distinction between murder and manslaughter? We heard out of the gun court in downtown Kingston this morning. If you haven't heard, the former member of parliament for Western St. Mary, Jolyan Silvera, has indicated that he is prepared to plead guilty to the lesser charge of manslaughter in relation to the shooting death of his wife, Melissa. I've just brought you up to speed, giving you the timeline, how we got to this morning. But there is a matter that people are asking about: murder versus manslaughter. What's the legal distinction? To assist us in that effort, I'm pleased to be joined by King's Counsel Pierre Rogers. Good afternoon, Casey.
Hi, good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon to yourself and to your